This technology has been around for 50, 60, 70 years using the same rod lenses. And so we felt it was about time that an innovation was made in this space to help the surgeon operate more streamlined.
Dr. Liz McGloughlin is a physician turned co-founder. She sat in operating rooms, watched surgeons work around a rigid endoscope that hadn't fundamentally changed since the 1960s, and decided to build a better one. Tympany Medical is redefining how endoscopic surgery works. Variable angle visualization, integrated cleaning, a single-use platform, a market worth over $12 billion in the US alone. Starting in ENT and already getting clinical feedback from surgeons at Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins and UPenn. But here is what most people in the industry would not have seen coming. The former COO of Karl Storz USA, the #1 rigid endoscope company in the world, is now the chairperson of Tympany's board. Someone who spent 30 years selling the product Tympany Medical is here to replace. He chose their side. And that is where this conversation gets uncomfortable. How do you defend design choices where regulation risk timelines push towards compromise? Liz said something in this conversation that I keep coming back to.
I fundamentally believe that if we stop developing hardware, we're goosed. So I think we have to have people doing hard stuff for hard problems in hardware.
This episode is about what it takes to build a physical product in one of the most regulated, most scrutinized industries in the world, where design is not decoration, where the gap between an idea and a product that ships is enormous, and where the people who close that gap matter more than most people realize. This is Why Design. Liz, welcome to Why Design. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me, Chris.
You're very welcome. Looking forward to diving into this. So, Liz, you didn't start Tympany from a trend deck. This began with clinical immersion and seeing a problem up close. But so before we get into your background, take me back to a moment where everything shifted. You know, where were you exactly when you saw the unmet need? Perhaps you could paint the scene for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So the program that myself and the co-founder did is a program called Bioinnovate. It's a program that's really focused on needs-led innovation, and so part of that is stepping back and looking and observing in the clinic, whether it's the operating room, whether it's the outpatient department, and trying to see where there are gaps in the healthcare system. And really for us, some of the real challenges were occurring in the operating room. And they weren't just occurring for the patient, they were actually occurring with the surgeons and the types of tools that they had access to. And really driven by Rory, whose background is in medical device design, he could really see that there was an opportunity here around being able to see around corners, being able to operate without having to continuously change the angle of view of the tools. And so that those insights of how the surgeon was performing the procedures were part of how the Tympany story began.
Amazing. So to correct me if I'm wrong, so before Tympany, it was to change angle, you change tool. So it's lots of kind of in and out, and I guess quite a long procedure which also cuts down significantly.
Depending on the clinical area. So I think one of the things that really drove me towards the solution in this company was, the technology that we're talking about is a rigid endoscope. Rigid endoscopes are used for lots of different procedures. They're used in ENT surgery, they're used in neurosurgery, they're used in laparoscopy, they're used in urology, gynecology. So really lots of different areas where this issue is a problem. And traditionally how the surgeons have viewed the clinical, the site of intervention was with a rod lens. So a rod is a long pipe of light. And so that light is at a fixed angle. And so they have to change the angle every time that they use the scope at the moment. And so we felt in the modern kind of evolution of technology that this is kind of a crazy way for surgeons to be operating. And that's kind of how it evolved. And, this technology has been around for 50, 60, 70 years using the same rod lenses. And so we felt it was about time that an innovation was made in this space to help the surgeon operate more streamlined.
And what did the clinicians say when you guys asked
Why is it done like this?
So actually, one of the key moments for us, we were working with some US-based clinicians, and Rory had a bit of a sketch on the back of a piece of paper around trying to access and illuminate the surgical site in a better manner. And the surgeon said, I was only thinking about that last night. I was like going to sleep thinking, how on earth do we get more light into the small spaces in ENT, so that we can do the operations better? So I think, those kind of aha moments, that we're not the only one thinking about this problem, and that what we've seen is validated by the clinician. It was really important point for us very early on.
Right. Amazing. Was that the first kind of moment where you thought we might actually be able to solve this or fix this problem?
I think it was probably the first moment where I thought it was a problem, that was worth solving. I suppose knowing whether you can fix it or not is kind of an iterative process, I think.
Yeah.
Before we dive back in, this one is for founders and CEOs building physical products. If you are thinking about hiring a VP of product, chief product officer, or head of R&D, this is not just another hire. It defines how your roadmap is set, how your teams are built, and how your company competes. At Kodu, we specialize in securing senior product and engineering leaders for hardware businesses entering their next stage of growth. Focused, discreet, high consequence. If that decision is on your horizon, find me, Chris White, on LinkedIn, and let's talk it through.
So perhaps you could give us a kind of the elevator pitch of Tympany, and who you are, what you do. Let's for those who don't know.
Yeah, so I'm Dr. Liz McGloughlin. I'm the co-founder at Tympany Medical. Tympany Medical are redefining how endoscopic surgery is performed by integrating variable angle visualization and integrated cleaning into a single-use platform for rigid endoscopy. This is an over $12 billion market opportunity in the US alone across multiple clinical indications, starting off with ENT.
Amazing. I think you've clearly practiced that for the investor pitches.
I don't know why now, Chris. So it's never the same twice, though. That's the key.
No, good. So long as the core there is still relevant. But let's say design in medtech is often treated like a nice to have, but if something isn't usable, it doesn't get used. So when did you form your opinion on that?
I think very early on, when we were doing needs-led innovation during the Bioinnovate program, I had a good understanding that there's a lot more to the process of healthcare innovation than meets the eye. So you can have a lovely looking product, but the end user and the different stakeholders that interact with it are actually hugely important in whether that product gets adopted or not. And that is probably something that's being more and more acknowledged over the course of time. And I think it's really important to have that at the heart of your business. We're quite a unique founding team, actually, from that perspective, with my background in clinical medicine and Rory's in industrial design and medical device design. We come from quite a different background than a lot of traditional medical device teams. And that has a lot of strengths in terms of us having very clinician and user centered discussions around both the product features, but also the usability and the human factors of the product.
Amazing. And why do you think in medtech design still gets undervalued?
I think the complexity of the engineering in medical devices is front and center, and it has to be, because it has to be both really robustly designed, extremely safe, and there's a huge amount of regulatory barriers to getting a product to market. And so that's where a huge cost base comes into it in terms of running programs within either small companies or big companies. And then there's sort of an afterthought. But I think from where we have worked at best is that we have really strong clinician relationships, which have driven a lot of our product features. And so the engineering then can fit into that nicely after you've had that work done with the end user. And there's really not much you can do if you've engineered the product and then go to the end user. So it's probably a legacy issue as to how products were designed and then handed over. And as regulatory has increased in its burden, you've had to just add more engineering costs that build and test for the regulatory requirements has meant that it's actually just harder to fund that design phase process, and it does mean that you have a longer time to market. And I suppose that's the other dance that you're trying to work out, is how fast can you get product to market.
Yeah, and it leads me on to my next question. How do you defend design choices when regulation, risk, timelines, push you towards compromise? Because you want to have a great looking and usable product as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's you have to integrate it into your processes. So we, as I say, we do every 8 or 9 weeks we're meeting doctors around our product, and we're not compromising on that piece. Regulation is here; it's going to always be here. It has to be here. So you just have to be creative, and I suppose work with people who understand the interface between the fact that it needs to be well designed and the regulations. So that's where you have to be kind of a broader thinker when it comes to your strategy.
Yeah, I'm guessing, especially in your case, you're competing with a technology that's been around for decades, and clinicians, I'm guessing, aren't the quickest to adopt to change. I think you probably correct me there, but so it's got to stand out, and it does
have to stand out, absolutely. And so I suppose I've mentioned at the beginning quite specifically that this is a single-use endoscope. And so when you look at single-use as an evolution, a lot of the single-use products have been just the same product in a single-use version. From our perspective, why bother? There's no point. So you have to have differentiation if you're going to introduce that real kind of hard shift from a reusable to a single-use. And that's something that we've worked really hard on, to make sure that moving to single use is differentiated, but it's also at the least impact as possible. So you're not just moving to single use for the sake of it. You're moving because it has better features, better impact for the patient, and also is much more ergonomically designed. So one of the huge pieces of feedback that we always get is, oh my goodness, this is so light, it's so easy to use. And that's just a really phenomenal piece of feedback that we weren't expecting. We didn't design that in. We didn't think that that was going to be the kind of number one thing that we get feedback on. But because we've been in market discussing with customers when we give them prototypes, they really want it to be that light. And actually, then you come back to the engineers and go, it has to stay that light now. So then there's a real dance. They're like, sorry, how light was it when you brought them a prototype?
Yeah.
So but that's a really important piece for us about kind of how do we get people to change practice? And actually ergonomics is a really important thing. Surgeons are looking to have, a professional practice beyond their clinical training of 35 years, most of them. So you can't have something that's really heavy that causes them neck pain, back pain. And actually 80% of the rhinologists they surveyed in an Australian study have neck and back pain associated with their practice. So it's actually a really big problem. And so design and ergonomics and human factors actually comes full circle as to the why they will change as well. So it integrates that piece of how do we compete with the incumbents, but also why is the design piece very important.
Was that a happy accident, that you're solving that problem as well?
I suppose in some ways it was, but in a lot of ways it's to do with the advances in the technology. So when you look at the traditional technology, there's a rod lens and a camera system was put at the back end of it. So it creates this back heavy piece of equipment. We're putting a camera at the tip. And so the system is much lighter overall, just by virtue of the fact that we're using a different technology. So it was always, when we started designing, it was always going to be lighter because of those legacy issues that they've had with the product. Yeah,
brilliant. And then, for someone listening or watching that works within medical devices, medtech, what's one design principle they should steal? borrow?
Borrow. Keep talking to your customers. We would, so we're around a little while, and we did a first iteration of our product development during COVID. And actually, we had loads of sessions where we were sending prototypes to the clinicians. We were doing video sessions in their temporal bone labs. And yet we couldn't really hit the nail on the head in terms of, are we getting this right or not? And so we took a step back, maybe towards the beginning of 23, and sort of re-scoped how we were going to discuss things with the customers, and went back out and, had a lot of interviews, market feedback, variations on features, how far do we need to go on the engineering side in terms of that angulation? Do they want 10 different angles? Do they want 5 angles? Do they want 3 angles? They're actually happy with 2 angles. And so we were by talking to the customer over and over again, we were able to actually narrow down how our engineering roadmap looked like. And then that makes it much more attainable in terms of your product development. So you can add all these bells and whistles and features if you're not talking to them, and you're probably going in the wrong direction, because most of them, if you really nail down and you say, okay, what will do 90% of your procedures, and that's where you can really get things right or wrong, I think, if you're not.
Yeah, absolutely. Your first product doesn't need to be the one that you finish with. It's the minimal viable product to get out to market, and
it's funny you say minimum viable, right? So and maybe I think that's a really challenging thing in medical devices. I think it's actually one of the biggest hurdles, because in all other product development, consumer brands and anything that's not as highly regulated, you can iterate quickly and put it in market. Medical devices, because you have so much regulatory to get through, your minimum viable product actually needs to be, how quickly can you get a simulated test model to test your minimum viable? So it's actually a slightly different thing of getting to market with your minimum viable. It's how quickly can I get to the customer to test it, be it a simulated model, an animal model, a cadaveric specimen. That's the real MVP cycle that I think people need to really think about, and get that piece correct. Because if they get that wrong, it can cause a lot longer term issues. So identifying where and how you get that so-called MVP tested in a medical device roadmap is key.
Yeah, because I'm guessing that will unlock funding and customers, because you've proven.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Well, okay. Well, let's talk around kind of some decisions that defined Tympany then. People romanticize startups like it's all instinct. Your path sounds more disciplined, like more disciplined de-risking. Perhaps you could talk me through a moment where it started to feel like a real company. You followed, I think, the Stanford biodesign approach. What was the hardest filter for your idea to pass?
So I think understanding markets that are not really, really hot and sexy effectively is really challenging in medtech. So you'll always be able to get data on heart failure, valve replacements, stents, neurovascular, peripheral vascular. They're all really well-defined areas of medical device development and have really, really strong data. So I think when you're going into more of an area which is around tools and instruments, that becomes actually much more tricky to quantify numbers and strategize around that. I think I had a little bit of a leg up advantage in understanding that, coming from a clinical background, having sat in many operating rooms, watching lots of different procedures using rigid scopes, that I was able to, even if I didn't have the numbers, I could go, these are used in a lot of cases. Like even if I can't pull exact numbers, I know when I speak to an orthopedic surgeon, a general surgeon, a neurosurgeon, an ENT surgeon, they all handle these scopes. And so you get that validation more easily from that community. But I do think that market and market quantification is very challenging, and you just have to keep chipping away and trying to get as much detail as possible. And as you said, like, I think that for me, I was using some instinct to make some of those decisions because I had knowledge. So I think instinct is a combination of gut, knowledge, and maybe the community around you. So I don't think it happens in isolation.
No, absolutely. I'm guessing, on those areas where there is more data available, that's because there's obviously been a lot more research done. There's a lot more medical devices in that area. So is it harder to therefore get funding in that area, or in, say, an area like ENT where there's not as much data available?
Yeah, I think funding in medical devices is challenging. I think we're in a situation now where hardware is really difficult. I suppose this is why you have this podcast, is talking about hardware development.
Yeah, hardware's hard.
Hardware is hard. I fundamentally believe that if we stop developing hardware, we're goosed. So I think we have to have people doing hard stuff for hard problems in hardware. But funding is difficult in medical devices, full stop. So I would not like to say, just because you're doing a vascular device, it's easier. I think it's just a more known pathway. It's the structure of your roadmap is clearer, and your go-to-market strategy is clearer. And then the also piece that is important is that you've got clear line of sight on strategic cell acquirers, and kind of how they're playing out in the market. So that's the difference. Doesn't mean that there is no funding, no, but it does take a bit more work and a bit more creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what's obviously you're gaining funding now. So, what surprised you most around turning the clinical need into a fundable business?
How many hours I would spend on the phone to solicitors.
Have you kept a tally?
No, I haven't kept a tally, but I'm fairly good friends with them now. So no, I think medicine and clinical practice is, and anesthesia in particular, it's all go, like it's quick decision making, and then you're done. And I think what always surprises me in I suppose the more business side of things and the more company development is there's nothing that happens really quickly. So it is just a case of like, you just have to keep showing up every day and keep moving things onwards. And so there's I suppose a resilience piece there, that just because it didn't happen yesterday doesn't mean it's not going to happen today. And so you have to keep motoring like that. So that's probably the biggest surprise, but also, one of the things I think medicine probably prepares you for more, because there's so much uncertainty in medicine and you have to make decisions without all of the information at the table. So in a startup, you're always making decisions without having 100% of information. So I think there's synergies from that piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And you went through the Enterprise Ireland pathway.
Yeah.
Going through that program. Perhaps before I get into the question, you could kind of outline what that is for people that maybe listening in Ireland aren't familiar.
Yeah, so everybody in Ireland who works in startups knows who Enterprise Ireland is. So for those who aren't familiar, Enterprise Ireland is a state agency. It is actually one of the biggest backers of startups globally. I think it's top 3 of early stage businesses across the world. That might be old data, but that is definitely something that was in place a number of years ago. They have a number of different programs. Some of them are university based, some of them are based on funding as part of equity rounds, and then some of them are funded through partnership programs with the Department of Trade and Enterprise. We have tapped into all of those. We're really lucky here to have access to those programs, and there's a myriad of businesses based, a lot of medtech business based on the west of Ireland that have worked with Enterprise Ireland to get their businesses up and going, and a lot of products now either very close to market or in market as part of that support. So very successful agency overall. And so we've been really lucky to be able to work with them. One of the kind of quirks, I suppose, is that at the beginning of a lot of these projects is you do what's known as a commercialisation fund. That's based in a university. So there's a university hold the budget, and then you have to-be founders effectively working through the project, trying to de-risk their technology roadmap, their opportunity. I think, it's an interesting one for a space like life sciences and medical devices. To raise initial capital for an idea from friends and family is really, really tricky, especially I think in Europe. So this allows you to have a kind of period of 2 years de-risking opportunity, and then going to specific angels or seed funds with, not just something on the back of a piece of paper. And I think that's a really important piece of how do we get, hardware products from inception out into the marketplace. So that's the first step. Subsequently, then we were very lucky to get a Disruptive Technology Innovation Fund. This is a partnership project. So how it works is there are usually one research performing organization, so a university or an academic institution, then another industrial partner, and then the lead partner effectively is generally either the startup or the SME. And so you have this consortium and you're working on a defined goal, but it's really a kind of industrial research. So it helps companies that are trying to be very innovative and, not just, taking the next step on the run, but really trying to take big leaps in terms of technology. So we've had 2 of those funds awarded to the company, and have worked with the National College of Art and Design and RCSI and UCD in Invermed, and then Gentian Services down in Shannon. So have had a very broad base of collaboration across multiple institutions through those projects, which I think is really powerful as well. And coming back to kind of how complicated medical devices is, you just need as many levels of expertise as possible to get you to the next phase of development. You can't hire it all. It's not possible.
No. So you get to tap into kind of the hive mind, so to speak, and then there's an advisory side, is there, or is it more of a kind of go out and seek advice or experts within the community?
There are advisory mechanisms through Enterprise Ireland as well, so there are smaller grants you can get to support very early stage projects to kind of tease out ideas, get some mentorship and that as well throughout the life cycle of the business. So I think where we're at now actually as an ecosystem is that we're all starting to kind of outgrow what supports were there now, and private capital isn't where it needs to be to get these companies to the next phase. So we're kind of looking to figure out how you can get companies to a certain point. Everything's going later and later. M&A is later, like Series B is later, Series C is later. So we now have another funding gap. But I suppose that's a positive outcome of how the ecosystem is maturing, that you're not just having lots of seed projects that are going nowhere. You actually have quite a number that have gotten quite far and now just maybe need the last little leg up to get to the market.
Yeah, awesome. What have you learned about yourself, through that process?
I like being, I like moving things forward. I like the progress piece.
Yeah.
I think I love building something from nothing. So we first kind of got offices in a place called the ATU iHubs. This is kind of a university co-located incubation center effectively. We started out there. And kind of in the last year and a half, we've moved into our own offices, and it's that kind of forward momentum of okay, we're not just a project anymore. It's actually building something that's more robust, and so I really enjoy that part. other things I've learned about myself. I became a mum as part of this whole process as well. So I don't know which I've learned more from actually. So it's been a dual-pronged learning curve. So yeah, I think you can do so much. Like sometimes you've very little time and you can still get a lot done. I think that's probably, and then there are periods of time where you just are like, I don't know how to get anything done here. So I think that's the kind of fast, slow piece of startups.
Yeah. Wow. So was that a International Women's Day event on Thursday actually, and the theme was how how to play the long game as a woman in design and engineering, and some of the stories were inspirational, but a lot of it centered around how do you claim your career back after taking time out from kind of having children. So interesting. Your kids must be quite. How many children have you got?
There's seven and 5.
7 and 5, crikey! So
and
COVID babies.
COVID babies, but also I would say I couldn't really be involved in that conversation because I didn't take much time out. So
no,
I'm more on the opposite end of like, how do I take time out after all this? So, yeah. It was.
So when was Tympany founded?
We spun out of the university in 2021. We had secured the commercialisation fund before that. I was working on it throughout that period. I didn't mention actually we did also get some EIT health funding as well. So that's another European body that's provides funding to early stage companies as well. So so that was when we spun out of the university at that point, but a lot of work before that.
So you're just staying on the family situation then, because starting a hardware business is hard. Starting a hardware medtech business is really hard. Doing that when you've got very small children at home, you've got that balance. So how did you balance all of that kind
of? Poorly. No, I think, one thing I would say that I have done, and a lot of startup founders are kind of horrified with it, but I don't really work the weekends. I do my best not to, because I don't think I can keep going if I work the weekends. So I try, have that bookending of the week. Obviously, if there's a weekend you have to work. That's just the way it is. But for the most part, I try to manage that piece. I also have a phenomenal office manager, which is key. So I would speak any female execs. I'm like, whether it's a PA, an office manager, a virtual assistant, a nanny, like whatever the extra bits you need, you have to find them and figure them out. So that's been key for me. And lower your expectations. So like, there were periods of time where, you think you're going to be cooking all these lovely meals and you see them on Instagram and these fabulous dinners for your kids. Just got it. You're not going to be able to do it.
No, it's, I think it's a general good rule to have in life. Just kind of, good enough is good enough. It's fine, and it's easier to exceed those expectations as well if the ceiling's
and I think for a lot of us, like, I look at my kids and their life is glorious. Like, they have like, they walk to school, they scoot to school, they see their friends on the way, like they have a really lovely life. And I think a lot of kids do now. Like, the standard of living has gone up from when we were smaller. And so we have to remember that we're all fine, even though maybe we had less than them. So I think, they do have a great life. I'm actually jealous of their life. It's great fun.
You're out in Galway, aren't you?
Yeah.
So absolutely stunning part of the world.
It's quite wet, but otherwise stunning.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. So, yes, went slightly off the script there, but it's so important to hear as well. The reality of you seem to be presenting as you're doing really well, but I think a lot of people will relate to, we're just getting by, in certain areas of our life. but it's fine.
And it's all cyclical as well, you know. Sometimes
Yeah.
you'll have to drop a few balls. I think, I'm sure you've heard it before, like, are the balls glass or not? And so if you're juggling, there's a few plastic balls that can go on the ground, but the glass balls have to stay up, and you have to figure out what are your things that can't be dropped. And that's the key.
Yeah. Or which ones you can delegate.
Yeah,
I've
exactly.
reading buy back your time at the moment, and a lot of that is about kind of growing that network and getting support.
I actually, it's funny when we talk about this, right? So I've been really lucky that we've been pretty well funded over the course of the business's lifetime. And I think what I see a lot of in the kind of female founder space is that people not only are trying to build a business, but they're also underpaid. And so you're asking people to be underpaid, find the people to delegate, but delegating just costs money. And so I think that when you look at actually where we're struggling is, like, I'd argue that female execs need, you know, more pay than the average, because actually all of that delegation piece is very costly. And so there's a piece there that doesn't get talked about a lot, but it is really expensive to be a startup founder, and have small kids and try and do that whole piece. So yeah.
Massively, yeah. It's and bravo to you for getting through that. So we continue to live that, I suppose, very small children. So let's talk about the team then, and the setup. So currently, what's the size of the business? There's obviously yourself and Rory as co-founders.
And we have a team of 12. So we have a number of junior engineers, both students and grads. Then we've product manager, quality manager. We have a VP of R&D who's really got a background in electronics. So I can spend a whole load of time talking about the challenges of electronics here as well, if anybody is interested. And then we've also our CEO is Michael Gilmore, so he's over 25 years experience in the medical device industry. As part of my management of life, I've kind of moved more into a clinical and strategy piece in my job. So I was the founding CEO, and as of July last year, I moved into a clinical focused role. And that was, again, coming back to, like, how do you do it all? How do you have the clinical expertise, be the CEO, be the mom? So it was kind of you have to balance that. So our team is quite lean at the moment. We're 12 in total. And so the goal is really to grow that probably to about 20 total as we go through the next phase of funding. And yeah, I think it's very interesting watching, you know, when you go through times of financial constraints and seeing how you can get quite a lot done with quite a small team. It's been a really important exercise and learning for us over the last 12, 15 months.
It's incredible, really, what you can do today with, you know, if you set your mind to it and leverage, you know, AI and technology, but also, you know, offshore talent. My team, we're 50-50 in the UK and overseas, you know, because I don't need to be paying kind of, for someone that's not going to be in the office, I don't need to be paying UK salaries when actually I can pay a really good South African salary and get someone, you know, frankly, that's much better than a lot of people I've previously worked with, you know. And it's life changing for them. It's life changing for us as a business. So, but you know, on the tech side, it's bonkers what you can do now if you and it's changing all the time.
It's funny. I'm a really strong believer of being in. So maybe I got the post-COVID piece of being like, oh my God, working from home is a terrible idea. But in products in particular, so I think you're definitely right. The tech roles, the kind of ancillary roles, a lot of them can be done remotely. That's absolutely brilliant. It makes such like massive sense. I think one of the key learnings for me as a first-time founder and a first-time founder in medical devices is this piece of building products and having your hands on the product as much as possible, and having as many of the engineers knowing, you know, what goes where, which glue was used, was it UV, was it epoxy, was it, and so if you lose that piece and only have one or two people that can do that, you're very vulnerable actually. So I think I totally agree with you. There's a real benefit to it, but it is, and I actually think it's why medical devices is getting harder and harder, because more and more people are looking at roles that can be remote and how they can manage that. But in Ireland, actually, and this is a very large segue, but the applications for healthcare-based courses in university have gone up by threefold or something. This
really, that's interesting.
Because I think it's obviously kids seeing that like AI is taking a lot of grad jobs. So now I think you're going to see people kind of moving back to physical world jobs and physical world training, which I think, you know, is a really good thing, because we're obviously short-staffed in all of those areas. So it's kind of back to that. But I think equally it's the same idea. Like if you want to be a product designer in a hardware space, physically sitting with where the product is being built is very valuable.
Huge, and you know, for me and most of the people I interact with, it very much depends on the role and what you're going to be doing.
Yeah.
Hardware's hard enough. You know, you can't do it all remotely. So having that collaboration. That's why, you know, I'm in my new office now, and we set here so I could onboard UK staff and be around them, and give them the flexibility. They don't have to be sat next to each other all the time, but it's really helpful when we are. But it just depends on the role. But so you mentioned it there in terms of it's really hard to hire, especially in the post-COVID world where, you know, people want flexibility more often than not. Couple that with the fact that you guys are in Galway, so you know there is a good medtech scene in Ireland, a very good medtech scene, isn't there? But you know, have you, you know, as you've grown, you know, have you found that location's a barrier, or have there been any kind of?
Honestly, I think one of the biggest challenges we've actually had is housing. So there's a massive housing crisis in Ireland in general, specifically in the urban areas. So that piece has been a challenge for us. And the cost of housing has gone up really significantly. So that's put wage pressure on. So you are looking at a situation where in order to kind of have these roles, you have to have a lot more funding behind you in the jurisdiction. That's likely to not get any better anytime soon. So it is something that we will have to look at in terms of location long term. But I think medical devices, because of the niche of it, having people who've experience in regulatory across medical device products, having that pool of talent here is really valuable and has served us well. Electronics, back to my electronics, that was quite tricky for us in the outset. We really struggled to find particularly hardware electronics. So there's quite a lot of, you know, software firmware coming out of universities, but actually that hardware piece, it's very course specific, and I certainly didn't understand that, you know, electronic engineering in one university is not the same electronic engineering as another, and so you've to start to understand, you know, who's working on hardware, and often it's kind of what would have been known as techs. So the technological universities that are they've all shifted into university status, but they previously would have had more of a focus on the hardware and the technician piece. But for our product, we really need people who understand that part, and so that was a big challenge. And, you know, even just knowing your own skill set gaps, like I think when you start off in founding a business, that early stage, like, people just want to hear ideas. They just, you're kind of, you don't know how you're going to actually do it. You're just saying, I want to do this. I know there's a market. I know there's an opportunity. And so it's really until you start to kind of get going and peel back and go, okay, right, how are we actually going to hire for this? That you start to think. And I would say I've learned a lot about my gaps, the team's gaps, understanding what people's gaps are over the course of the time. And I'm much more confident in how I would assess that now than I would have been 5 or 6 years ago.
Let me pause here for a moment. Most of the leaders on this podcast did not grow because they hired quickly. They grew because they hired well. The right senior engineer can accelerate a hardware roadmap by a year. The wrong one can stall it. At Kodu, we help physical product teams make that hire with clarity and precision. If you're about to make a key design or engineering hire, or thinking about your own next move, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Let's talk before you commit.
So you mentioned when we spoke previously that some early hiring mistakes. You obviously infer in there that you didn't know. I'm guessing you didn't really know or have defined what good looked like, or the nuances between the different universities. What was the key takeaway or thing that you do now that you didn't do then?
I think you do have to have an instinct piece, back to kind of the instinct. I think if you think the person isn't a fit, they're likely not a fit. And I know that probably is counterintuitive to kind of like HR training and bias training and all that kind of piece. But ultimately, the first people in the door are make or break. Like you can add, person number 52 and have all of that kind of training and make sure you're not having biases. But culture, is really important at the early stages. And getting on with people, and enthusiasm, and being able to just dig in when it's really shit and things have gone wrong and it doesn't look like you're going to pull it off. Like, the people who are able to stay steady throughout that are so important. And so I think character and soft skills for me are really, really valuable. And it's not that everybody has to have them. You just have to have critical mass of people who have them, who can influence how the business flows and is directionally. So I would, I think, yes, HR managers might not be delighted when I say, let's go for a coffee with them. Is that okay?
I think that's it though, isn't it? You've got to spend in 40 plus hours a week with these people, especially when you're such a small founding team. I've got friends in the industry that their mantra is, it's either a hell yes or a hell no. There's no, when you're that size, there's no sitting on the fence or it might work out, because it probably won't.
It probably won't.
Yeah. So when obviously you talked about hiring a lot of graduates, have you managed to hire any experienced people and persuade them to take a bet on kind of a young Tympany?
Yes, as I said, we've a VP of R&D who's a background in electronic engineering. He's was in the aviation industry and the medical device industry, very senior roles, and we did convince him to take a leap of faith. So that was really, really valuable, and actually not quite on the internal team, but on the board, we have Charlie Wilhelm, who is the former COO of Karl Storz USA. Karl Storz are the number one rigid endoscope company. He grew up selling devices in the operating room, moved his way up in that organization in the US to report directly into Mrs. Storz, who ran the business up until about 5 or 6 years ago. She passed away just before Christmas, but it was a family business and run from Tuttlingen. And so he has been in market for 30 odd years in this rigid endoscope space. And I think convincing him to come onto the board and become the chairperson was one of my, I suppose, prouder moments in terms of convincing people that what you're doing is going in the right direction. And is an opportunity worth spending time on. And that was good.
Which came first, your VP or the chairman of the board?
That's a good question. I'm just thinking back to timeframes now. He was on the board. When
Yeah.
yeah.
That's a big win, isn't it? That's a big kind of confidence boost for anyone looking or considering jumping from something that's relatively stable potentially, to a scrappy startup. It's like, we are, but check out this guy who's on our board.
I mean, the other piece as well that has been really valuable. So we have another team member who came out of the Bioinnovate program, and she would have looked to start her own business, but I convinced her that she should join us before she decided to start her own, because I think actually getting experience in a startup before running a startup would have been really valuable for me. But we also have kind of quite strong US connections. So, we work with doctors at UPenn, Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins, which are very big hospital names. And so we're not messing about when we talk about clinical feedback. And even docs in the UK who are based at Imperial, we try. Yes, we obviously get validation from local Irish doctors, but in order for this device to move into the next kind of level and to be accepted in the market, it has to be people who are in market. So and that's, I would say, in all honesty, that was really driven by the Bioinnovate process. They, it's all good and well talking to people in Ireland, but get your butt on the plane and go talk to people in the market that you're targeting.
Oh, yeah.
And that does help bring people into the business as well, that they can see that there's those connections.
That's huge. Yeah. Brilliant. And I want to ask you about your interview technique, or specifically, one interview question that you rely on that reveals the truth fast, that helps you get that gut feel.
I always start with kind of tell me about yourself, because I think if someone doesn't have an ability to articulate their story, their history, where they've come from, firstly, I think it relaxes people a little bit. But also in 5 or 6 sentences, you should be able to give the highlight reel of why you're a good fit. I think it's probably a good thing to do, especially if I think my background is in HSE interviews and all that. So I would have done interviews for schemes and all that kind of thing, and it's very different. So I haven't been interviewed in quite a long time, actually, so I don't know how I manage it myself now. But I do think just being able to articulate yourself in that early phase, where you can give the interviewer a little bit of comfort that you're able to articulate yourself clearly, and also able to settle your own nerves and have an ability to do that yourself. I think that would be the 2 things that I would give people advice on.
Yeah, that's it's a basic one that I think, with all the advice that's floating around and at your fingertips these days, it's probably one of the easier ones to overlook.
Yeah,
but you're right. If you having a well, not a scripted, but a well rehearsed, elevator pitch to tell me about yourself, that's useful outside of the interview as well. Good networking events, and it's having that nailed is awesome.
Yeah. When I started Bioinnovate, actually, I found that really exposing, because I was quite young when I did it, and there used to be guest speakers, and there was only 12 of us in the room, and you'd go around the room and everybody had to introduce themselves. I hated it. I really struggled with it. So now I can see that if I was that age again, I'd be like, no, just nail that bit, and then you feel more comfortable in the room. And you most of the time, if you're at the interview, you have every right to be there. So just remember that you're there.
It's a very, very good point. Yeah. So loads of really interesting sound bites coming out of this, Liz. I'm looking forward to Larry chopping them up and sharing them with the world. But that's, yeah, it's basic, but it's super useful. We're gonna wrap up shortly, but I want to talk about, again, just carry on with hiring at Tympany as well, because obviously you mentioned that that's going to be you're going to be growing, like doubling in size potentially. So I want to make sure anyone listening to this, they know how to reach out, what's up for them. But what kind of person thrives at Tympany, and what kind of person would struggle?
As with any startup, anybody who's really rigid and like loads of processes, that's a tricky one. So I think if you are creative, if you are willing to kind of work hard, it's not kind of like, Elon Musk sort of stuff, but I mean, sometimes you do have to dig deep, willing to dig deep, has an enthusiasm for the fact that medical devices you can be creative, but then you have to pull back and you have to be able to put a process and a system around that. And someone who's able to kind of flex between the two is really the best kind of person in this space. And then it depends on the role. Our goal and our vision is that, we start in ENT surgery and we move into lots of different clinical areas, working with different clinical partners over the coming years. So, we'll have some people who we will want to work in that early stage product discovery piece, and then some people who'll be, FDA submission, test method validation, regulatory, biocompatibility. So, it does depend on the role. So it is very broad. And actually, probably one of the biggest challenges of the business is how broad it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and over the next 12 months or so, what gaps are there that you need to fill? What roles or skills matter most for you?
Yeah, I think over the next period of time, we're hoping that we'll pull in mechanical design engineering. So that will be one or two roles in that space, hopefully coming up towards the end of the year, and then in senior electronics as well. So they're kind of two gaps. We use a lot of contractors at the moment in some of those roles, and they've worked really, really well. And I think that's another thing maybe for founders is, if you find a few good contractors, that helps you to balance your payroll versus your NRE cost in a way that you're not like paying everybody on salary, and you can manage that a bit better.
You've got it on tap as well.
Exactly, yeah. So you can turn on and turn off a bit more easily. So we've definitely used that to our advantage over the last 2 years, and it has been really, really beneficial. So yeah, we will probably have some of those kind of jobs as well to come.
Well, I know for a fact there'll be mechanical design engineers listening to this, both contract and perm. So hopefully this is a useful asset to share at the time. But before we get to that, what's the mission you want kind of a future hire to buy into before they even see a job description?
I sat in the front room of a house that had no furniture. We just bought it when I first started Tympany, and I was on the phone to Rory and we were talking, and I was like, hold on, this could go anywhere. Like, this is an opportunity way beyond ENT surgery. So the mission really is changing rigid endoscope technology, and that our technology becomes the standard of care for rigid visualization in surgery.
Amazing. And where should people follow the journey, reach out, or
LinkedIn? We're on. That's our main social. I use my Instagram for just personal perusal. And then Tympany, www.tympany.medical.com.
Amazing. And we met at the Fix, didn't we, in Oxford, or just outside Oxford. Are there any other conferences or shows like that are coming up that if people happen to be going, they can come and seek you out?
We are going to Gothenburg for the combined European otolaryngology meeting in April. And then we'll be at things like medtech strategist in Dublin. So a lot of medical device focused investment and clinical conferences over the next 6 months.
Fantastic. Well, Liz, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm glad we finally got to record, and just behind the scenes for anyone listening this far in. We had a full start a few weeks ago where the connection just kept throwing us off. We had a bit of a scare at the start of recording this one, but we seem to have got over the gremlins. So it's been an absolute pleasure to actually get through the conversation, but also just being part of the conversation, Liz. It's been great. So we'll share all the details of how people can reach out on the show notes. Yeah, until next time, Liz, thank you so much for being on Why Design.
Have a great weekend. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Very welcome. Happy St. Patrick's Day.